it's really very interesting to see a book that has to do with something that is always very difficult to convey. Because when we are talking about Auschwitz, we know, for example, that Adorno would say, after Auschwitz, we cannot write. And then you take the task not only of writing, but of writing with humor. So this must be really very difficult dance, because you have to respect the feelings that are associated with something that has to do with such a sorrow, with such a pain, that is very difficult to try to convey this with humor. At the same time, I always appreciate the way that cartoons and this format of graphic novels can convey, and I would like you to show some of the pictures that are here in this book, so we can have all together a glimpse, and then to read the book, of course, to see what it's all about. Here we see something of the work of Michel that has to do with trying to portray what happened during Second World War. But if we see the next picture, we will see what's the problem all about. Por favor, la siguiente imagen. You see, we are trying to communicate something that came from reality, and then it's translated into another language. Y por favor, pasamos la siguiente imagen. This image is so powerful, so painful for all of us, because it has to do with something that destroys our most inner core of innocence. This is the image that is here in the sports center. You can see a sculpture of this here. And of course, si vemos la siguiente imagen, it's then transmutated or translated into this. So, si seguimos con la siguiente imagen, we see Auschwitz, and la siguiente imagen, por favor, and then we see what Michel is trying to do. So this is just a way of trying to see the challenge that you have, and if you can speak about it, how you can take on this difficult subject and to do it with humor, and also breaking some of the taboos that are related with this work.
Thank you for a question, Pepe. By the way, the little kid I drew with his hands up, I drew myself. Because when I was a kid, and when I was taking my father's books behind his back, I did not know I was taking his books on the Holocaust. And I was watching the pictures to try to build a sort of imaginary Holocaust in my head, because he could not tell us. I always felt I am that kid. So this is why in the book I did him a big nose like mine, some dots here like me in the sun. I got some dots in the pyramid yesterday, and that was to me a challenge, and I'm glad, Pepe, that you have chosen those pictures, because the most, let's say, the most challenging challenge for me in the book was how would I translate visually those iconic photographies. Will it be right to translate them into my funny style, into my comic style? And I felt I was doing good. That was, when you are an artist, you think a lot, you analyze, but at the end, when you sit to create, it's all about sensibility and intuition. Because I'm not a scientist, I'm an artist. And I felt when I drew myself as that little boy, and I felt that when I drew all those iconic photos of the Holocaust, like the room of Buchenwald, which is the iconic picture of the day of the liberation. That was April 1145. My father was there, and in the picture, in one of the beds, lies Elie Wiesel. This is a real picture, so touching it, making my own interpretation was taking some risk. It was breaks, but that was also the only way to integrate the two things, my personal story and the Jewish people history. So this is why, to me, it was all natural, but I understand that it was not easy, probably for readers. To me, it was natural to do that. But I knew I was putting my finger on an open wound, that it could hurt, but that I had no other way to do it. So the whole book was, by the way, a sort of puzzle made of historic references, family photos, and my imagination. And my goal was that everything will be and look for the reader credible. But I have invented a lot of scenes that I had no photos. You know, when I was a kid, I could not make selfie with an iPhone. I even had no camera. I had my first camera at the age of 15 when I visited Israel for the first time in a machaneh with a Shomer HaTzair. My parents brought me Instamatic Kodak. Those of my generation probably remember. And that was my first camera in life. So I was taking few pictures because it was expensive. You had to develop, to wait 1 week, 10 days to get the photos. Some were out of focus. Today, you shot like with a Kalashnikov. You put in your computer, it's very easy. So I had to fill a lot, things that were not existing. And I had also to invent images to situations that were more conceptual than real. So the whole thing, the thing that put all this together as a glue in my funny style of French-Belgian comic drawing. And I had the feeling when I did the first pages that it works.
And you know, what's very interesting is that what can capture the cartoons, the drawings, that images like photographs cannot capture, because there is something very subtle also there, that you can convey something much deeper. Why is it that with humor and with just simple lines, you can capture what and narrate a story that cannot be narrated even with photographs? Because you discovered this also along the way.
Okay. It's really a good question, because it's a question that I ask my students when I teach. Because, you know, as a political cartoonist, one of the things I love more is photojournalism. Not filming, because video is too quick, and you have to if you, for example, when something happens in the world, let's take the image that you all know, Ilyan Kurdi, the little boy, age of 3, that was found dead on the Turkish seashore. On the same moment, he was discovered by the border guard or by the police. And his photo, lying between the seashore and the sea, was put on the internet. The whole world could see it. And that boy had a name. So, at a glimpse, yes, in 1 second, he became an icon, a world icon. And the sensibility of people who saw this migrant problem as something vague and far, suddenly it had a face, it had a name. But we, the cartoonists, what did the photographers were to put this evidence online, on TV, newspapers, internet. We, the cartoonists, and I can speak for all my colleagues in the world, we have to think 1, 2, or 3 steps further. Because just copying the photo, we do nothing. We don't create anything, we don't say anything. Because cartooning is expressing an opinion. So what is my opinion upon that? And there's another question. Is it possible to make a cartoon of a tragedy, which is related to my book too? And are there taboos, things that should not be shown? And the other question is that in the internet era that we live today, is this question relevant? This question stopped to be relevant. once, probably not long time ago, in some countries, there was censorship on the press. Today, how can you control? Today there are other things than censorship. There are propaganda in the internet, okay? Lies, to the light of the day. So, if I take this cartoon, I thought a lot. I was in front of these images in Haaretz, the newspaper that I read every week, on TV, everywhere, and I said, what can I do? What Michel Kichka has to say about what is happening? And my feeling was that until I would not have a strong statement, I will do nothing. But for a cartoonist, when a tragedy happens, or when something important happens in the world, you must react. Not reacting is a professional fault. You must do something. But if you are not sure that you have the good idea, it's better to do nothing. Because there's nothing worse than a bad cartoon, to me as a cartoonist. So I thought, and after one day, I had an idea, you know, in the comics, you have a lamp, ding, over your head. I had this idea to draw this little boy as a giant and little journalists around him taking photos and filming him, putting him in the center of the world preoccupation. And that was the thing that I put online, and I had the feeling I did something right and strong, and I was talking more about the press than about the tragedy. That was my aim. And this cartoon of mine was published in different websites, different newspapers, so I was pleased that the idea I put aside thousands of other ideas, some were good, some were less good, all over the world, could take the attention of the readers and of the people. So when I do a comics, it's absolutely the same. Let's say the way is totally the same. And I think that comics is a wonderful tool to communicate to all different levels of people. And I had here David, who came to me to sign his book, your nephew, Marcos, and he's 10. And I was very pleased to sign for it, but I told him that I did not mean that young boys of his age would read the book. I did not do the book for this age. I did it for adult readers. But because this is comics, and because my style is a very friendly style, is a very humoristic style, so kids can get to it very easily. And I'm glad that you have read it. I'm glad that it's possible to read it in different ages. And in Israel, when I have presented my book, when it was published in Hebrew, and I was invited to different community centers and public libraries to present it, I had in the audience sometimes people over 80 who were first generation of the Holocaust. And I did not think that the first generation would read it, because I did it for the second generation and the third. And also I took as evidence that probably a man and woman about 80 don't read comics. So the best feedback that I got was in Netanya, a woman aged 82 that told me that that's her first comics that she ever read in life. So you see, you create something, you put it, okay, let's say on the market, as you are doing with the Spanish version, and things are happening that you cannot control, you cannot know. And it's very interesting to me to live this experience, because the book has been existing for more than 3 years, and every 6 months something new is happening. And this is the newest and last thing that happens now. Being in Mexico for the first time with all of you.
Spanish. Yes. And you know, when trying to capture then this subtext or another view, another angle of something that has happened and that is so much related with you. In the book, you have the angle of the second generation, and it's a book about the pain of the Holocaust, but it's also a book about the pain that is transpired, or it's like humidity that goes everywhere. And you have some drawings that show this. Of course, when you're trying to relate it personally, trying to find your father in the photographs, la siguiente, por favor, and trying to read all kind of books about this past, la siguiente, por favor, and the nightmares. And so, can we talk about this subtext, this hidden reality that is in the second generation, that has to go with silence, that has to do with silence. Later, we'll talk about how it also has to do with words, because with your father, the first problem was silence, but the latest problem was silence within the words. That means he could communicate what had happened to him, but there was some kind of silence. There was no intimacy.
It's not a simple question what you're asking, because, you know, if I had to deal with the question before I did the book, I would probably not have done it. I simply, the process that led me to do the book was something that happened inside of me for 10 years. A sort of feeling that I need to do something with that thing that I could not define. And the book, I don't know if I answer your question, but at the end you will tell me if yes or not. The book exists for many reasons. One of the reasons that it became to me too heavy, to have it on my shoulders and not to do anything with that as an artist. The other thing was that I felt that during my professional life, I did illustrations and comics and cartoons for newspapers and magazines and advertising societies, and I did nothing for myself. And most of the things that I did have been published and they have disappeared. Published and disappeared. In the recycling of paper, in the word of pixel, and I needed to do something that will stay. And I still think, I'm an old school, I still think that books stay. And I think that books are stronger than pixels. And let's say that in 20 or 50 years, you could check if I was right or not. But to me, today, I think I'm right. Because there are a lot of, even in my field, the field of creation, visual creation, a lot of people say print is dead. And they try to prove it to you in different ways. And when you have, for example, as most of you, a cellular phone with a good camera in it, and you leave your photo in your cellular phone, or you just download them on your computer, and then your computer dies, you have no photos. So I think that what I do, for example, and I shot a lot of photos, every 6 months, I select the best, I send to print, and I keep them printed. So this is somehow a way to me to deal with modernity and the thing that I learned from the past. You know, when a house burns and people have to escape, not to be burned, what can they take with them? They take the fridge, they take the computer, they take the family albums. Because if it burns, there's no memory, no evidence of this memory. So, it's not the answer to your question. But another reason for which I did this book, and this I understood from the very beginning. I wanted to do the book to the memory of my brother. Because my brother's memory, and this is what happens in the center of the book, the heart of my story, my feeling was that my brother's memory has been erased by my father's story. This is very hard to say. This is very strong. And this I could not say to my father, as I tell it now in front of you. And now, I don't know if my father really understands what I'm saying now, but it's not important. This is to me very important. That I put it, the book is divided, and that was the idea of my editor in France, Gisèle Dehaene, with whom I worked for 1.5 years by Skype. Every week, sending my sketches, she was sending her propositions. After I drew all the sketch of the book, because a book like this, a graphic novel, has to be written, sketched, and finally drawn. She told me I suggest to divide the book in 3 parts, 3 main parts. Your childhood and teenage, which is in Belgium, first part. Third part, your life in Israel. And in the middle, Charlie, your brother. Because it belongs to all my life. And I felt that this is a good idea, and that I had the space, and I can give space to my brother's memory. Another thing that drove me to do the book was that at the beginning, when I thought of doing it, I was every time postponing the project because I was thinking and feeling that it will be too hard for my father to deal with that book. Because if I want to do a real work, I need to tell the truth. And the truth hurts. The truth is not so nice. My father built himself another, let's say, another story of our family life. He thought we were a happy family. And through the book I said, Daddy, you mistaked. But at the end I said, but I understand you. And I don't blame you. So that was not easy, and all the time I was thinking, not now, not now. But I was also understanding that I was taking the risk that he will pass away and I would not do the book. And that probably after he passed away, I would not feel the need to do the book. So this was a real challenge that bothered me for years, until a point I could not sleep in the night. My wife knows this, that I was, during the night, most of the time awake. My comics was like a movie in my head. My hands were doing nothing. And I felt guilty, I felt stupid, I felt useless, I felt ridiculous, I felt a coward, that I don't stand up instead of trying to make myself sleeping and do my book. So all those reasons together brought me to a meeting that I had, that I explained in the epilogue. I was in Tel Aviv, and the attaché culturel of the French embassy is a good friend of mine, was a good friend of mine, and his wife, actually, she's a psychologist, she's a second generation, and her field of research is post-trauma of the second generation of the Holocaust. And we had a coffee together in Tel Aviv, Nathalie and me, and we were talking about ourselves, second generation, even joking on ourselves, our parents. And I said to her, listen, I have a project, but I cannot do it because my father is alive, and I would probably wait for him to pass away to begin it. And she was shocked a little by this statement, and she said, what is your project? And I told her about the book that I had in my head, which is the book that you have on the table. I told her for 1 hour, and we drank 4 espressos. And at the end she told me, very gently, Michel, you must do the book now, where your father lives. And you have to offer it to him. Otherwise, if he passes away and you don't do it, you will regret it deeply. And the way she said it, I knew she was right. And she said it so gently that I decided to do the book. And the last reason is that a year or 2 before I did it, I began to write notes for the book to come. But also, I began to tell around me, to colleagues of mine, to friends, I'm doing a book. But I was just taking notes. I'm doing a book. So Olivia, my wife, who is a wonderful woman, and if you read the book, you will discover her. Once she told me, she put me with my bag on the wall, and she said to me, Michel, you have to decide. Or you do your book or you shut up. You have to decide. And I was totally astonished, and she said, and if you ask me, you don't have the guts to do that book. And that broke me totally, and the day after I began the book. This is the story.
And you know, it's very difficult because writing a story for first generation has the problem that had Primo Levi, because you're dealing with radioactive material. And Jorge Semprún, a very good Spanish writer, wrote a book that was called Writing or Life. And in some way it was also a dilemma for you, because it's not about suicide for you, but yes, about confrontation with your father. Because as an artist, you could see something very, very deep that I was very amazed. There is a drawing in which you don't see the eyes of your father, as if his eyes had vanished. And that's really very powerful image, because that means that he had all the things that he had to use drops for the eyes, because maybe he couldn't weep. So it's so difficult to confront your own father and seeing there that there is almost no light in his eyes, and to confront it with this. And I would like to know what your father said, because this is not told in your book. What's the reaction? Because your father, when you will read the book, the audience will read the book, you will find out that the father later on began to speak about his experiences, and he was in the marches of life, but of death, yes, of death. We call it in Mexico Marcha de la Vida, no? But yes, it's the March of Death. And it's very interesting because you can see that he cannot communicate with you. He couldn't tell his story, but once he began to tell his story, he was just talking about it, and this story erased everything. Erased the story of your brother's death. Erased everything. So how you can confront your father with this? This must be really very difficult.
It's a very important question. I was telling in the story that my father began to grow with groups of young high school pupils from Belgium at the age of 16, from Brussels to Auschwitz and back. He did it till today 48 times, and he has been invited in different schools, but the same schools every year to the same class, because the people are all the time changing, 480 and some, for almost 500 times. And when he tells his story, and you were telling, he talks, it's like today, after he did it so many times, it's a sort like, you know, pushing on a button and automatically he knows what to say. And it's good. I think it's the way to protect himself when he tells the story, not to cry or not to be hurted by his own story. So, but to me, after what happened in our family, I was looking at that with criticism. Because when he was talking to me, because you have to know, he lives in Brussels and I live in Jerusalem. We are not just neighbors. And when we meet and we talk about that, as with my father today, there are no other subject of discussions, just the Holocaust. if there's an exhibition of Rembrandt, Father, what do you think of Rembrandt? Very good, but you know, in Auschwitz there were no exhibition of Rembrandt. Okay, yeah, or different things. But my father was telling very proudly, after he was giving testimonies, they all cried. And there's also a frame in the book that you will see, that I'm in Jerusalem, my father was in Auschwitz, he was back in Belgium, I called him, "Hi Daddy, how was your last trip to Auschwitz?" He said, "Very successful." They all cried. This is somehow a sort of way for it to measure that he succeeded in testimony. If everybody cries, he's good. And then I think, but he never cries. I never saw my father cry, never. Even at my mother's funeral, he did not cry. The only day, the only moment I saw him cry was at my elder sister's funeral. She died in 2006. She was buried in her kibbutz. My mother was buried in my sister's kibbutz too, but she died in 2001, my sister 5 years later. And at the funeral, my father has a text that he had written. After the first sentence, he began to cry a little. He gave me his paper and he said, "Go on for me, please." That was the only time. And I thought, somehow it's funny that he loves make people cry and he does not. Funny somehow, yes, it breaks. And also I said, but why can't he cry? And my way of trying to explain it and to visualize it, because comics is all about visualizing ideas. It's not only writing them. So I drew my father in front of me, and I saw his eyes are so little that you can hardly see them. And I explained that he has probably all his drops, all his cry, they are in Auschwitz, they are in Buchenwald. I'm sure that he has cried all the nights. This he never told me, by the way. I think he cannot, but I am sure he has cried all what was possible. And when he came up from there, he was unable to cry again in his life. And so to depict it strongly, I drew that his eyes had disappeared. So he takes his glasses off, and here is a white space with no eyes. And on the big frame that comes under, my father is crying in the camps, and everything is in the water. My father has water under his knees, the camp is underwater. And that was to me the most challenging part of the comics. How to translate visually those things. How to make them interesting. And by the way, in the process of creating, I had incredibly wonderful insight of how I can visualize it. So that you have to understand that the process of creating the book was the best period of my life as a creator. I enjoyed every single moment because I was doing a project very, let's say, so significant to me, so meaningful to me that I had withdrawn and that I have postponed for so many years. At least I was doing it. And in the other hand, I was enjoying, artistically speaking, to find solutions, visual solutions to difficult topics that I was challenged all the time. And when I finished the book, you know, for 1 year and a half, I was healthy, I was in a wonderful shape, I almost did not sleep. I was working 16 hours a day, average day of work, which is 2 days for a normal worker. I could not sleep in the nights because I was going to bed at 3, 4 o'clock in the morning with so much adrenaline into me, inside of me, like rivers. I could not sleep. I could not breathe calmly. I was just thinking, when is the morning? I have to go on. And a few days after I finished the book, I got sick for 1 month. I succeeded to keep myself so concentrated, all my energy. That was a funny process. Does it answer your question?
Vamos a pasar las siguientes imágenes rápidamente. We see here some of the... This is very interesting because Michel father was an artist himself. And, but I just want to say that you have to put attention to all the details, because in this drawing there is a reconstruction with memory that is amazing. You can see even here the Keren Kayemet Israel, the boxes, the little blue boxes, blue and white boxes, and Vishniak Vanished World book, a scene that you can almost see in all Jewish homes. But the reconstruction of memory, the details that are there, are as important as the story itself. Si pasamos siguientes imágenes, vamos pasando varias imágenes. This is one of the father's drawings that in some way also inspired your work. Siguientes imágenes, por favor. And this is very interesting because this has to do with the vocation of Michel. And this is a very moving story because this book is about sharing something, sharing compassion, understanding the other. And in this story, really, Michel, you really capture something that has to do with translating pain to other cultures and how other cultures can receive this communication, but also transfigured with beauty, because that's the amazing thing, that you're talking about something that is a tragedy, but art has some way of dealing with it that takes you into another dimension.
Yes, thank you. You know, to me, one of the most important things is that book would be beautiful. With my own, let's say, way of measuring what is beautiful. I wanted my book to be beautiful. I wanted it to be aesthetic. I thought that creation is a sublimation, and that just putting all what I have inside on the paper is not enough. This is just the first step. I have to transform it to something beautiful. And when we had the presentation at the library, we had Boligan and Beth. Beth was the first time I met him, but Boligan is, I can already say, an old friend and colleague. One of the best cartoonists in the world, to my opinion. And what I like in his work is that each cartoon it does about human tragedies, wars, ecology, climate disaster are all so aesthetic, so beautiful. And this is, I think, the most important thing in creation. So, and this is why I put so much work in it. And this is why it took me so long. I thought that it would take me half a year. I said, 100 pages, 3 pages a day. Okay, in 3 months I finished the book. 3 months and some. Then I understood that it would be more, and I said, okay, 6 months is okay. And it took 1.5 years. But I did not regret, because once I started, I could not stop. And I had to, let's say, sacrifice a few things, because I could not receive any other assignments. I was totally into it. I had just 2 other things I was doing during the week. I was teaching on Wednesdays at the Bezalel Academy in Jerusalem. I had a class in the morning, a class in the afternoon. So I went on teaching, and I had every Friday to draw 3 cartoons from the French TV channel TV5 Monde, that I can see in my hotel room, with Spanish subtitles. So now I can understand Spanish subtitles even. And I had 5 days to me. And when the telephone was ringing for an assignment, for a magazine, a newspaper, I was hearing Olivia answering the phone because she said me, during the time you do the book, you don't answer the phone. You don't wash the dishes. You don't throw the trash. You don't go for shopping. I do everything. Just concentrate, finish it, and leave me with your story. And that was a wonderful period when I was totally protected by an invisible wall that Olivia built around me. And I was listening, hearing her answering the phone. Yeah. Oh, listen, I'm sorry, Michel is for 1 year in a shelter. In a shelter? Yes, he's in a very big project and he cannot, if you can wait, you would have to wait. If not, please find another illustrator to do the job. And that was wonderful to me. Because that was also the first time in my professional life that I was working for myself. I enjoy working for others. But at the end, you know, I had, let's say that 2/3 of my career is behind me, okay? And that the most important part of it, with the 1/3 is in front of me. A lot of the things that I've done and in which I have put so much creativity and energy, they don't exist anymore. It's somehow frustrating. I don't know if you can understand that feeling. And that book, I knew I was doing something that would stay. So I concentrated all what I learned through the years to put in the book. But I don't remember what was the question.
And this was, yes. It has to do with that,
okay.
And it has to do with your teacher.
Oh, I want to tell you a story. There are 2 pages in the book that were not planned. I had a drawing teacher when I was 13 and 14 in my school in Belgium. One day after the class, that's what you see, he asked me to stay in the class after the bell. You know, after the bell, they all take their bags and they run away. And he said, wait. And then he called me and he said, Michel, this is a present for you. I draw you. The relations between teachers and pupils at that time were very strict. We could not talk openly to teachers. There was a big distance. And he called me by my first name, Michel. And I was his best artist in the class. He loved me. And he was, after the classes, doing comics. And he showed me pages of his pencil sketch of comics. And he said, this is what I do after school. And we had a wonderful relationship. And then, you know, I went to another school and then I emigrated to Israel and I lost contact. And when I was doing the book, I wanted to try to recontact him because I wanted to send him the book as a present. Just to see, you see, I was your pupil, look what happened to your pupil. To the one that you drew the portrait. And I could reach him. We connected by letters. He had no internet. And I sent him, in a letter, a copy of 5 first pages of the book. And he answered me that this is wonderful, very moving, very important, and that he asked me to hurry up because he's very sick. I did not know what he has, what he hasn't. And I was also, he put me in contact by mail with his son. I did not know his son. His son is a little younger than me. And then I was in the middle of the book and his son sent me a mail that his father passed away. And I was so sad that he passed away that I decided to put 2 pages that were not planned at all, because there's a very interesting story behind that. When I recontacted him, it was a few years before the book. I don't remember exactly how long. He sent me a letter with a painting of him. You see, this is a painting of my teacher. And I was so, this is an oil painting, big size. And he sent me a photo, a good quality photo. And I answered him in a letter, why have you chosen this subject? Why Auschwitz? And then he sent me another letter, and he sent me a document, official document, saying that during the war his parents helped some Jews in Belgium. They gave them some money, they gave them a place to stay when they were escaping the Nazis. He was not, you know, Hasidu Motaulan, how do you say this in Spanish? Justos entre las naciones. But he had a special connection to Jews. And this is also probably what connected us when I was a kid and I was his pupil. Probably there was something behind all that. And I wanted to tell the story. And this is the answer of your question, okay?
This little boy there.
And I write, probably this little boy, this is him. And the toy of the train is a symbol. And I regret that he could not see the book. But his son was very moved by the 2 pages I dedicated to his father. He did not know my relationship to his father. He did not know the full image, just a part of it. So you see, it's a book also, and this is probably the difference between, let's say, a comics artist and an architect. You can, in the process of the creation, make some improvisation. In architecture, you know, you can't. Everything must be planned. Each single details, to the handle of the door also, and to the screw of the handle of the door. In a comics, you plan something, and in the process of creation, you are drawn to another idea, and you take the freedom to develop it, and then it becomes something that you could not imagine, that you could not plan. And this is why I love so much what I do, is that I plan, and I'm open to things that are coming. That was my feeling during the book, that there were things that were happening out of me, that I could not decide. They were creating themselves, my hand was just an instrument. That was a very special feeling.
An instrument of memory. And but we are going to see just very rapidly some of the images of the book. This one we can recognize. Bravo, Michel, schön Kind, lo dijiste muy bien. And they are taking his cheek. That's something that all we know. And la siguiente, por favor. This is about Charlie, his brother, a very important part of the book. La siguiente, por favor. An homage to The Little Prince, but dealing with the father and son relation, and you can begin to feel that everything is about empathy. Everything in this book is about being in the place of the other, being in the place of the father, having the nightmares of the father. La siguiente, por favor. This is something very special because all this book also has to do with the power of memory. You know, when I see these little details here, of the rain, of the shadows that are there, very subtle in one place, and you're really trying to capture it, this is for me what is poetry all about, what is artistry. Yehuda Mihai would say, what I won't see again, I have to love it forever. And that's the book of Michel. Pasamos las siguientes. Es nada más para ir viendo un poquito del trabajo de Michel. Las siguientes. Y bueno, esta es la última imagen que sale en el libro. This liberated you really from this burden. The burden doesn't disappear, but there is humor, there is intelligence, there is complicity that takes you to other level of communication. So please.
Thank you, Pepe. When I ended the book, and the book ends with a dinner, a family dinner, with my 3 sons, my daughter and my father at my house in Jerusalem. We drank good Jerusalem wine, and my father and I began to tease each other with games of words about Holocaust. And that was a very funny evening. And my sons enter into that sort of competition, who will say the best but also the worst joke about the Holocaust. Because on the Holocaust the best joke are the worst. But between us, it is very funny. When an anti-Semitic is telling you a joke on the Holocaust, it sounds bad. When my father tells it, it's very funny. Just if he tells it to us, in our house, between our walls. So, when I finished the book, I had the feeling that I want to add an epilogue, which was also an unplanned part of the book. And I sent the last page, sketch of the last page to my last pages to the editor, telling her that the end will be a dinner with jokes on the Holocaust. And she said that's a very good idea, very courageous and very original. I take it, do it. And then when I sent her, she laughed a lot. She thought that was a very good way to end the story. And I said to her, you know, I want to add an epilogue about now the process that I've passed through to get to the word, the end. And she said, make me a proposal. And I drew 8 pages, and she said, you know, for an epilogue, 8 is too much. Try to reduce. And I took the best parts and I concentrated it on 5 pages, and she said, okay, 5 pages for an epilogue is good. For a book of 100 pages, it's a good proportion. Because there are some rules in books that I was not aware of. This is her profession, not mine. And I had the vision that the last frame, the last picture that you are seeing, would be me with my boxer, unshaved and tired, flying over one of the pages of the comics, happy, light as a bird.
Like Chagall.
Like Chagall. You say it. I did not have it in mind, but I had this feeling that over it there's another frame of me in front of the mirror in my bathroom, and I look terrible because I was tired, unshaved, because I was working at home